I'm Todd Jones, recovering from 30 years as a sports writer. Thanks for joining me as I sit down with some of the best sports writers of our time, who knew the greatest athletes and coaches and experienced firsthand some of the biggest sports moments of the past half century. We'll share stories behind the stories, some we've only told each other. Pull up a seat on Press Box Access. Welcome to the second and final part of our conversation with Patrick Reusse, a sports media legend in Minnesota. If you haven't already, make sure to check out part 1 for an episode of laughs and great tales from his 60-year career. In this part 2, we launch with Reusse's memories of Twins teams that warm all hearts in Minnesota. Hey, Reusse, the Twins enjoyed their glory days. You know, when you were no longer covering them as a beat, you were actually the columnist at the time. They won the World Series in '87 when they beat the St. Louis Cardinals. And then in '91, the Twins beat a very young Atlanta Braves club. That was really one of the all-time classic World Series. I think you once said Game 7 was like the greatest event in the history of Minnesota sports.
Well, maybe 6 and 7, 6.
All right, well, 6, you got Puckett making the catch and hitting the homer.
Hitting the home run, and then 7, you got the 1-0. And those last 2 games were fantastic. The 91 series was much better, but 87 is remembered almost more here because it was the first one. They had a parade that was unbelievable. And for that one, went down Nicollet Avenue in Minneapolis and then went over to St. Paul and the best state capital. And it was phenomenal. 87, as I said, the first one. But Tom Kelly, it took him forever to. Andy McPhail wanted to hire him as a manager after he was the interim for 23 games, and Carl Poland was the owner and was afraid of having 2 guys that young running the team. So we finally let him hire Tom Kelly, and that was almost Thanksgiving by the time they made that announcement that he was coming back. And then the great quote on that is Bob Gebhardt, who later became the Rockies general manager, still going. Great, not working anymore, but still with us. And Gebby was, after they win the 7th game, 2:00 in the morning, there's a little drinking place reception thing that they have going across the street from the ballpark. And Gebhardt's quote was, "We were just trying to get organized and we won the bleeping World Series." That was the surprise team. The 91 team was really good. That was a really hellaciously good team.
Yeah, Puckett, Herbeck, all those great players. Gladden.
They had some of those guys that came up and were terrific players. That was a really good team. Greg Gagne, the shortstop, always underrated. Terrific shortstop. They were a better team in 91.
Okay, Game 6 and Game 7, though, the ears are still ringing, right, for anybody who covered those games.
Yeah.
The tension in the dome, the noise, the Homer hankies are flying.
Yeah.
What do you remember about particularly Game 7? Jack Morris going 10 innings, and then you're writing that night.
Yeah.
Tell me about, just being in the moment as a columnist.
They were holding the papers. I got to tell you about Game 6, though. The Star Tribune didn't hold that night to hold the papers. So we were, over 600,000 back then, back in the glory days. And I think we only made 200,000 papers the next morning. I'm still mad about that. But what I remember about Game 6 is afterwards, Jack, they run the heroes through the press room down there, and you're still trying to write. And Jack and Morris, they bring in the starting pitchers, Smoltz and first, and then Jack Morris. And they said, "Jack, what do you think?" Routine question. "What do you think about this chance to pitch Game 7?" And he said, in the words of the late great Marvin Gaye, "Let's get it on." Upstairs, right? I hear that upstairs, right? And I gotta start. Gotta get that in someplace,
That's gold.
And then the next day, goes 10 innings, pitches a shutout, and
complete game against Smoltz.
Greatest performance ever.
Yeah,
and also, Fulani Smith doesn't stop it. If Fulani Smith doesn't stop at second, or if they don't turn that then home to, the back to the pitcher to first base double play, they end up getting beat. But
yeah. Well, you once said that column was one of your favorites because Tom Kelly after the game was unlike Tom Kelly, who was usually pretty guarded.
Well, this was my Tuesday column after the follow. But I got to say that I used to tell Morris, by the way, you're the best winner I ever met. You really accept victory well. You're a great winner, but you're the biggest jackass I ever met after you get beat. He says, that's why I don't get beat that often, bleep hole. But
he had a point. I
got along really well with Kelly. And so now we're an hour and a half after winning Game 7. And I went into his office. I was in there. And I kind of sat in a chair. And all the players, Chili Davis comes in, gives him a big hug, and they talk for a minute. And then, anyway, I'm in there an hour, and the players are all coming in. And I thought writing that scene an hour and a half after the game's over, and his co-coach of his fantasy football team is a equipment guy named Lunch McKenzie, and I mean, you got all these characters and just to have that access there sitting behind the door and as players are coming in and talking candidly with them. I didn't say 10 words when I was in there. It was just listening to the thing and everybody that came in. And then the highlight was Lunch. They still don't know how his fantasy football team came out. The TKs, they were still,
The TKs.
They had other things to worry about. Lunch McKenzie gets his wife on the phone because she was supposed to keep score, That's because of what you could go on ESPN and see how your team did back then. You had to keep track.
Right.
And McKenzie's wife is telling him, oh, it was great, Tom. And Kelly says, that was last night. How did the TKs come out? That was yesterday.
That's the bigger question.
Yeah, the World Series was won. How did the TKs come out? That was a big question. He's been having some health problems. Smartest baseball man I've ever been around. His instincts are just immaculate. He could be grumpy, but his instincts were fantastic.
Yeah, quite a manager. Yeah,
he could tell a player in about 5 minutes. Tell if a guy had it or not.
You mentioned characters around Kelly in that scene an hour and a half later, and really characters. Finding characters is something that's been such a part of your career. You're always willing to go outside of the Twin Cities, all around your state, and find good stories. And you just became known for that. I mean, well, first of all, you're a character yourself. You were born in a tiny little town.
Yep.
Your father ran a funeral home. Your family lived upstairs. So you knew what it was like in Minnesota, small towns, right?
Oh, yeah. We were, southwest corner of Minnesota, a town of 1,100, Fulda, and then all these little towns around there. And my dad was the undertaker. He was a goofball of all time. Because I always said, if a small town undertaker has a good year, 40 funerals, right? 40. We were looking for the magic 40. We weren't wishing our neighbors any ill health. But you needed 40 funerals to make it, right? So if you had 40,
we're only at 28. We need a good train wreck.
We won't be having as much. We won't be having as good a Christmas if we don't get a couple more in here pretty soon. But
you understood those small towns, and you were able to understand why Minneapolis and St. Paul appreciated stories from those small towns.
Yes, because most people who live in the Twin Cities, not most, but a very good share of the people who live in the Twin Cities came from those small towns, came from that area. What they say in outstate Minnesota still today is, we're going to the cities. We're going to the cities. It was always the cities. And that meant you're going to Minneapolis, St. Paul. And we'd come up 4 or 5 times a year, and it was about a 4-hour journey back then. And it was just, hey, we're in the cities. There's stuff going on. So, yes, I did appreciate the fact that people, if you'd find somebody in one of these towns or write about one of these teams or something, you would you realized what a big deal was. Now, and this might have been some of the places you worked back in the day too. Before 1970, actually before the pros came in 60, one of the biggest events in the state of Minnesota every year was the state basketball tournament because it was one class. It was Hoosiers. Well, very close to my hometown, 1960, Edgerton is our Hoosiers. They won to one class, this little Dutch town, and they actually had they had fewer people than Milan, Indiana had, which is the source of the story of Hoosiers. And so I remember those days the state basketball tournament. One reason I knew what every town where it was in Minnesota, because I used to look at the high school basketball scores when they were playing their district tournaments to see who would go to the state tournament. And there's a story in every town. I said about the pandemic, Todd, that we went a year there with nothing going on, right? And nothing to write about. And I said, you know what? You find out there's 10,000 stories out there. You just have to have somebody tell you about them, and then you go get them, right?
Right.
And that was really a great period for just going and finding stuff, not going to the ball game.
Well, I always appreciated the fact that you were a big city columnist. You would travel throughout the nation, overseas for international events, but you were also willing to take the time to go meet with John Gagliardi, right?
Oh, yeah.
The St. John football coach. You were willing to go see a guy like that who then became rightfully well-known throughout Minnesota, not just because he won 4 national titles and 489, times, a record amount of wins, by the way, but the fact that he was a quirky character.
Yes.
And you brought that to life.
He was, yeah. I mean, I always said, Todd, that when in doubt, in the spring and there's nothing to write about, go up and see how Gag's doing, because he'll give you something that you don't expect. And there's just guys like that all over it. I really do think they're. A couple of weeks ago, somebody tells me, hey, there's this gas station out on Minnetonka Boulevard, which is out Highway 69. And the guy still pumps gas for it. He still comes out and washes the window and pumps gas. And
he's like the Japanese soldiers on the island didn't know World War II had ended.
Yeah, and he's got a race car out in front. His daughter races at one of the local speedways. So I said, I'll go scout him out. And this guy, David Goodman. I went and scouted him. I said, I'll drive out there and say hello to him and see if there's a column there. I was there about 10 minutes, and I said, okay, this guy's crazy. I'll be back tomorrow. I'll get your daughter here, will you? There's a free column here. I always say free column. That's what you're always looking for, the free column.
I love it. Set one on a tee, batting tee for you. Just put it up there, and we got a free day.
And Todd, as you know, the clubhouses are getting so much tougher. Everything's so much tougher than it used to be.
Right.
If there are characters in that clubhouse, you're going to have a hard time finding them. And you're not going to be able to sit down with them for under 45 minutes at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because the clubhouse opens at 4 and it closes at 4:30.
Right. Well, think about it. Think about the time that you're at Bear Bryant's last game.
Yes.
They beat Alabama, beats Illinois in the 82 Liberty Bowl. You're there, and you interviewed Bear and his buddies about hunting turkeys.
Yeah, no, that was a couple of years earlier. I was trying to get Bear to talk to Bear, and I think it was 81, so it might have been his second to last year. Well, I call up the SID, and he says, well, come on down the week before Auburn, because they're off, and he'll see him. I sat in his office for 2 hours, and Jimmy Hunter came in, and they talked about turkey hunting for an hour, and you just sat there and listened to him. I mean, calling an SID and saying, hey, can I come down and see the most famous coach in America from the St. Paul paper? And they saying yes. Not today. That ain't happening now. That's not happening anymore.
Right.
Now they only talk on Tuesdays, at a mass press conference.
So what do you recall about that 2-hour conversation with Bear Bryant?
I just was amazed. I guess that, the gruffness you expected in that situation. He was just enjoying his buddies and enjoying life, and wasn't worried about Auburn yet. Wasn't doing anything. But you could also see him and imagine what he was like when he was young and full of piss and vinegar, as the Texas A&M boys found out. But he was just a real guy. And one thing about his last game, where I went to his last game against Illinois in the Liberty Bowl, right? Wasn't it?
Right,
Illinois,
right, yep.
And Eddie Robinson was there getting an award.
The great Grambling coach.
I went up and,
right.
The Grambling coach. And I went up and sat in Eddie's hotel room for an hour and a half and ended up doing an Eddie piece later. His wife was up there, a great gal, and talked to Eddie. But it worked out really well because a few years later, I was at the Doug Williams Super Bowl, Todd. And it's San Diego, remember? They basically pushed us into a garage after it was over. And you had 600 reporters trying to get in to talk to people at these podiums in this dump of a garage. And I, even being a well overweight guy, I got pushed coming in, and I got pushed, and standing next to the wall was Eddie Robinson, Doug Williams, coach from Grambling, and a guy I knew from before. And I talked to Eddie for 20 minutes about Doug and said, "See you guys later. I'm going upstairs. I got what I need." So I'd rather be lucky than good anytime when you're out covering something.
Right. Sometimes you just need to happen to be in the right spot at the right moment.
That's right. That is right.
Speaking of football, you were there in 75 at the Met, the old Metropolitan Stadium, when Roger Staubach threw the Hail Mary pass.
Yeah.
The Cowboys beat the Vikings 17-14. You're in the locker room after the game. I mean, that's one of the most famous plays in NFL history.
Yeah. I was I was doing the Dallas locker room. And I knew everybody was mad because they'd throw the whiskey bottle and hit the Armin Terzian was the referee that was the official.
Oh, yeah, hit him in the head with a whiskey bottle.
Corby's bottle. I believe it was Corby's. There's been a discussion, but I think it's been misreported.
What type?
It's been misreported as to what the bottle was. It was a pint of Corby's, I believe. Came out of the right field bleachers. But you know what happened that day in addition to this unbelievable thing? Sid charged in. This is when the referee's room used to be open, right? You just knocked on the door and the reporters, you went in. And Sid stormed in there. Armin looks like a Revolutionary War soldier. He got his head all wrapped up, blood coming out. And Sid starts MFing him for screwing the Vikings out of going to the Super Bowl. And the next year we had pool reporters. The next year, Sid created the pool reporter rule by screaming at Armin Terzian. But it was something. I was in there talking to Drew Pearson. There were 6-7 people in, and all of a sudden here comes the people from the other club locker room, and the locker room at the visiting locker room at Met Stadium was built for about 20, and you had 200 in there. And everybody's, the Cowboys were shocked that the Vikings were, felt that, you could see at the end, the Vikings are screaming and Tarkington was screaming, but the Cowboys were in there just kind of celebrating, having a good time, and then everybody comes in, the Vikings say you screwed them out of them again. And it deserved it. It was a raucous place.
What's up? It's Kaylee Cuoco. When it comes to travel, we all have a happy place. I just went to my happy place. I just went to Maui, and it was truly amazing. Priceline has always been about getting you to your happy place for a happy price with deals you really can't find anywhere else. Like up to 60% off select hotels in Costa Rica or 5-star hotels for 2-star prices in Cabo.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
What was the temperature in the press box at Metropolitan Stadium in a late season Vikings game?
Well, they'd get the heat going pretty good, but if you had to go outside to the boys' room, it could get a little cool out there sometime. Jim Murray wrote a great column about, I don't know if it was that game. It was one of the playoff games he came to at Met because the Rams kept coming up there and getting beat, in the glory days. And Jim Murray got temporarily locked in the men's room after he finished writing 2 hours after the game, and they had a pound on the door, and somebody finally heard him. But he wrote a column about what it would have been like to spend the winter in the men's room at that stadium. It would have been cold. That was one of my favorite moments, by the way. I was at the first Pittsburgh Super Bowl, which was their third one in New Orleans. And I was a drinking man then, and had been out that night and was really hungover. We're going the next day. We're going out there the next day, and I come in at that Super Bowl, was supposed to be played in the Superdome, but they never got it built in time. So it was
at Tulane Stadium,
terrible,
right? Yeah.
Terrible Tulane Stadium. I walk in and sitting in the second, what am I in 1974? I'm a 30-year-old nobody, and I walk in, and it's Red Smith on my left, me, and then Jim Murray on my right. And I get in there, I'm hungover, and I said, "Here we are, boys, three of the greatest sports writers that ever lived." Red Smith.
They're looking at you like, who are you?
Red Smith laughed, and Jim Murray gave me the dirtiest look you've ever seen in your life. But I later on got to sit next to Red for the 81 World Series in the auxiliary press box at the Yankee Stadium for all three games were played at Yankee Stadium because the Dodgers came back and won the last four. So I got to sit next to Red, and he was a great guy.
Well, you mentioned your drinking days, and this has a football theme to it, but when the Vikings were coached by Jerry Burns, didn't you guys once have a road trip? I think it was in Tampa Bay, where he just invited the writers up to his hotel room?
No, I was not drinking anymore. But Burnsy, Mike Lynn got fired up because they started the year 1-6 or something, and then they won 5 in a row, and Lynn thought they were going to do something. So he decided to work out down in Florida, in Orlando, before they played Tampa. And so we were all down there. We went, we used that scam to go down there. And Merrill Swanson was the PR guy. And Merrill had a room upstairs, and he had a bathtub full of beer. And
love it.
Burning on. And so we're up there. We're doing our instead of doing our post-game, post-practice interview with Burnsy, he said, come on up to the hotel room. Burnsy will come up there. Well, Burnsy starts telling stories about Iowa and Fort Emishesky and Lombardi and everything, and it goes on for like 3 hours. There's about 4 of us reporters up there. 3 guys are drinking some beers, and Burnsy's drinking beer. And finally, after about 3 hours, Burnsy goes into the bathroom to relieve himself, and there's no beer. So he comes out and said, "See you later," and he starts leaving because he says. And we say, "Burnsy, what happened at practice today?" And Burnsy says, he's going down the hall. He says, "Boys, when the beer runs out, the bullshit stops." And he keeps going down. So we all got these great stories, but we don't know if somebody broke his leg at practice or not. Yeah, we don't. He was the greatest character of all time.
You were there when he dropped like 18 F-bombs in a post-game press conference after he won.
Yeah, after the Schnelker thing. That was an unheralded, everybody talks about the rants, when you got the Lee Elia rant and you got the Jim Mora rant. But Burnsy's was kind of this hidden gem until a few years ago. Some guy from Deadspin, when Deadspin was Deadspin, called me on the 29th anniversary and said, "I just ran across this thing." And he said, "We got to, this was made for Deadspin." And he interviewed me about it. And my highlight was that I got him started again. See, He went about 3 minutes of F-bombs. But then I said, how about the way the crowd booed when Schnelker's when they showed Schnelker on the scoreboard, and then he just went into F-bomb after F-bomb. Just
you opened the Bombay doors
again. The best part of that, though, was as he's leaving now, under his breath, he says, "Fuckers." That was his last word for this for the fans. Oh, he was the greatest. He was unbelievable.
Well, the characters are what made it so much fun, right? I mean, that's the thing.
Funny thing is, his team was hard to get along with. And he'd scream at us all the time and give us hell, but you'd always end up laughing because the next day he'd be great. He had one just as good, but nobody has a tape of it. After the year they made their playoff run, so 87, right? I mean, they made the run, but they lost their last two. That was the year of the scab ball players too, and replacements we call them. Union guys call them scab balls, but anyway, scab ballers. But anyway, see, that team lost all three of those games, so they were actually 8-4 team at one time. But then they lost their last two, and they lost the last one on Saturday, so it looked like they weren't going to make the playoffs. Then I think St. Louis lost to a bad Dallas team, and then they backed into the playoffs and made their run. But we went out there Sunday morning to see Bernsey, and basically the little interview room then was about big as two closets with a bathroom next to it, you know.
Wait, was there beer in that bathroom too?
No, we didn't have it. But 6, this was 10 in the morning, 11 in the morning. And Bob Sansamir from the St. Paul paper says your team doesn't have a killer instinct. Or he said, doesn't seem like your team has a killer instinct. And he went on screaming, killer instinct, you jackasses, you know. He just, and then in this little tiny room, he's just yelling killer instinct. But we weren't taping that. We were writing, you know, so we're all going, Nobody has a tape of the killer instinct one. It was fantastic.
Right. So do you have a favorite sports rant by an athlete or coach when you were covering something?
Well, probably Bernsey's, but yeah. Aimed at me.
Yeah,
I was writing for sports. I was the sporting news correspondent for 4 or 5 years because I at the end of my baseball tenure I did, and then I kept it for about 4 or 5 more years, and so. We had a guy who I got to be friendly with him when he was a Red Sox hitting coach. But Ron Jackson was in the crew trade. He was part of the crew trade in '78, and he had a nickname Papa Jack. Everybody called him Papa Jack. And I was writing the sporting news that winter, and I talked about writing about his lack of RBIs, and I said, they might start calling Papa Jack Papa Up in the sporting news. You know? But I never thought anything of it. This was like in December or sometime. I show up in Fort Myers in Orlando, and he comes at me in the dugout, and he's got a bat, and he's a big, strong guy. I never felt like he was going to hit me with the bat. He wouldn't have required it. But man, he was hot. That was about as hot as anybody's ever been. You know, because I didn't even remember what was going on, and then all of a sudden he starts screaming, "Pop up, you!"
Well, sometimes the outrage is. I mean, think about it. When you write something and the community becomes outraged,
yes,
then you're really in the fish barrel, and that happened to you. In March of '91. Now, you have said that this particular column, you said that episode changed me. In all seriousness, tell us about that column and how it changed you.
March 2, 1992, not that I remember it, but I was on a road trip up to the Iron Range to get some stories, and then there was going to be a boxing match in Duluth on Friday night, and that was going to be my column for Saturday because I think Michael Moore, remember him? Moorer, a good fighter, was fighting up there. I was going to do that. Well, it fell through. The fight fell through. So I'm writing. I said, what am I do? I'm going to make some witty remarks here, right? So my first remark was, this was during the Iraq War, and we had Clem Askins, who I got along with great. I love Clem, but he could talk himself out of a bad loss better than anybody. He really was an excuse maker, so this column was so serious that my lead was that if Tariq Aziz loses his job as Saddam's excuse maker, Clem could get it. Clem could take over for him. It was like, I was comparing Clem to Tariq Aziz. He was a spokesman that was on TV all the time leading up to the Iraq War.
So that was the start of this notes.
Yeah, that was
okay. And then from there,
second note, I'd seen a couple of one. I went to a junior college game that week to see Minneapolis Community College's men's team, and the women's game was beforehand, and it was just awful. And then I was in another game and saw the women's game, and it was terrible. And I wrote something. How come it hasn't improved? How come women's basketball hasn't improved more? I said, it still remains tiptoed ball throwing.
That's the line.
That was the line.
That struck a nerve in the community.
They had, this is a Minneapolis paper now. I was in the Star Tribune, so bigger audience. Don Shelby, a local newsman who had two daughters, a popular anchor in town, had two daughters playing, wrote a 35-inch editorial that they ran in the paper. And my stepson was going to school over here, and his best buddy's sister was on the basketball team, and they started a petition to get rid of me. And it was all over. If it was the internet age, social media age, I don't think I would have survived. So, and my first attempt to, because I went to spring training the next morning, didn't think anything of it. And on Wednesday, I get a call, not from the editor, from the publisher.
That's not good. When the publisher's calling you, it's not good.
All hell's breaking loose. And I said, okay, we'll talk about it when I get back, see how things going. I had 400 letters maybe, because you still had to write a letter. We weren't even emails yet. And then, so my first, they said, you better do an apology. So my first attempt at an apology was, I was going to write, kind of a soft criticism letter run, and then have a kind of a defiant response. And then by the die, if you read down, it was all the first letters were bold, and it was, okay, you win. Down at the bottom, it was me cowering for forgiveness. And the guy threw it back at me and said, that ain't going to work. That's not business. So then I wrote.
So they spiked that one.
Then I wrote an apology but I really did. It got me thinking, that, we're trying to, we didn't let girls play sports until the mid-'70s, go to a basketball game and try to compare it to watching a men's basketball game. And I became a big proponent. I have said, in fact, that I think probably the biggest event of my lifetime as a sports writer is Title IX, because you look back, how did manhood get away with it for 50 years? How did you get away with it? So
right.
It's and of course it also helps to have a granddaughter who's playing hockey and stuff, and you go watching games. But yeah, I even made peace with the controversial Chris Voles, who was the women's athletic director at U. She could start a riot in a nunnery, man. She was hard-nosed, never satisfied. But this year I called her up on a 50 to do the 50-year Title IX thing, and I did it. And she said to me, I said, I need to talk to you. And she texted me back and said, I don't talk to flaming or raging sexists unless they're reformed. And she said, "Oh, that's right. You're reformed." So then we had a long talk, and it was great.
Well, it showed that you actually, in the moment, you thought about it. You thought, you know what, I'm wrong.
Yep.
You know, you learned from it, right? Like you said, the episode changed you.
Yeah, it did. Those columns are out. Hey, women's athletics has given us twice as many places to go for columns, right? There's columns out there. You add a whole gender, you get a lot more. You get a lot more options. That's the whole
right.
That's the whole life. The whole life now is finding one more, right? Finding one more column.
Right. Well, I just think it's impressive that you were able to, at an advanced part in your career, say, you know what? All right, I screwed up. I'm going to think about this, and I'm going to learn. And then, like you said, you became a big advocate of women's athletics.
And although I did get in trouble again because the Stanford, we had the Final Four here in 95. The first time UConn won one, 95 or 6. And Stanford came in as the favorite and was terrible. UConn just ate their lunch. They couldn't move, and they got eaten up. And I had a joke comparing the Stanford women's team to their mascot, the tree, that didn't go over well with some of the hostesses of the team. But I said, hey, if it was a men's team that played like that, I would have written the same thing. So,
well, irreverent to the end,
yes,
right?
That's true.
I mean, when you think about it, all the different people you've met over the years, the characters, the places, international, national, in the Twin Cities, throughout the state of Minnesota, you've always been able to find those stories, the characters, the things behind the surface, below the surface. And I think you brought those all to life in a way that's been so entertaining over the years. And, it's just been quite a career.
Yeah, it's been a while. I don't know. My contract's up after this year. We'll see. So, but I'm, I still enjoy it. That's the thing. Why are you still doing it? They say you want to be the next Sid. No, I like sitting down and writing something. I don't do much radio. When I was doing more radio, it was a little tougher. But now this is what I got. So I really enjoy it, writing 3 columns a week.
Well, the people of Minnesota have enjoyed reading and listening to you over the years, and they've been outraged at times and laughed at times and learned many things over the years from you. And I know they appreciate everything you give them to sports journalism there. And I know I appreciate personally that you took the time to share these stories with us on this podcast.
All right, Todd. Thank you, sir. And I got to run downtown now and write a column about a 16-year-old auto racer who is from Minnesota, of all places, and he's driving for Joe Gibbs, which is pretty good. He's a young prospect. Wouldn't it be something if we were back covering Daytona again because of a Minnesota kid?
Thanks for listening to Press Box Access. You can find us here with a new episode every other Wednesday. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe and follow us on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast app. We'd love for you to review us. 5 stars would be nice. Follow us on social media. Drop us an email at pressboxaccess@gmail.com. And be sure to spread the word. Everyone is welcome here. This has been a production of Evergreen Podcast. A special thank you to executive producers Michael D'Aloia and Gerardo Orlando, producer Bill Huffman, and our audio engineer Nathan Corson. I'm your host, Todd Jones. It's closing time. Rock on.
Whether you are a brand new runner or you've been running for years, there is always a new way that running can change your life, and this is what the Planted Runner is all about. Being planted also means you're ready for growth. You can start exactly where you are right now and get better. I'm Coach Claire Bartholic, and I've coached hundreds of runners of all ages and abilities with science-backed training, nutrition, and mental strength techniques. And on the Planted Runner podcast, I'll share it all with you. You can be a better runner at any age. I'll show you how.